The telegram arrived just before noon, carried by a private who looked too young to understand what it meant. Directive 72C. Effective immediately. All non-essential prisoner compounds to be decommissioned and materials destroyed. At Camp Marlin, a sprawling POW installation tucked between cotton fields and pecan groves. The order landed on the desk of Major Robert Landon, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He read it twice, jaw tightening. Destroy the camp? The war had ended barely a week earlier. Japan had surrendered only days ago. The prisoners were packing to go home. Now Washington wanted the evidence of captivity erased. Lumber burned, barracks flattened, files incinerated. Outside, the heat shimmered off tin roofs. The German prisoners were still tending the vegetable gardens they'd planted that spring. They didn't know yet. Landon folded the telegram, slipped it into his breast pocket, and walked out to the parade ground. Major Landon was 39, an architect before the war, a man who saw structure where others saw ruin. He'd designed schools and courthouses before the draft pulled him into uniform. Now he stood in a place built not for learning or law, but for waiting. He'd treated the camp like a project. Efficient, humane, decent. He'd ordered screens for the windows, painted the infirmary white, and let the prisoners build a small chapel out of scrap lumber. His staff called him the Professor. The guards trusted him. The prisoners respected him, which in 1945 Texas was saying something. When Captain Thorne, his adjutant, found him that afternoon, Landon was staring at the chapel. "Sir, that order's from high up," Thorne said. "They want it done before the press starts snooping around." Landon nodded slowly. High up doesn't always mean right. That evening, the Germans gathered in the yard for their last meal. Stew thick with vegetables from the garden. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and salt. Landon walked among them quietly, stopping when Sergeant Friedrich Müller, the camp's unofficial spokesman, saluted him. "Major," Müller said in halting English, "we hear talk. Camp to be burned?" Landon hesitated. He'd hoped they wouldn't. "It's Army procedure," he said. "They want to reclaim the land." Müller frowned. "We plant here. We make chapel. Not only prison, home a little." Landon's throat tightened. He knew what the man meant. Over months, this dusty grid of barracks had become something fragile, proof that even enemies could live decently when watched by conscience instead of guns. He looked around, the chapel cross silhouetted against the orange dusk, laundry fluttering on lines, laughter from the kitchen. "Go on eating," he said softly. "We'll talk tomorrow." That night, the camp generator rattled out its last hours of light. Landon sat at his desk, telegram open beside him. The words, "Destroy materials immediately," glared like guilt. He thought about how much wood had gone into the chapel. Scavenged boards from dismantled crates, hammered straight by prisoners who sang while they worked. He thought about the carved hymn plaques the guards had started buying from them for souvenirs. To burn it all felt like killing the peace before it had a chance to breathe. At midnight, he picked up the field phone. "Thorne," he said, "wake the motor pool. We've got work before sunrise." By dawn, the camp buzzed with motion, but not the kind headquarters had ordered. Instead of piling lumber for burning, Landon directed men to load it onto trucks. He handed each driver a sealed envelope marked "Transfer Authorization, Civilian Infrastructure." "Sir," Captain Thorne whispered, "we're forging paperwork." "Correct," Landon said. "We're transferring the lumber to the county school district. They need classrooms." "I checked last month," Thorne stared. "That's not what the telegram meant." "That's exactly what it meant," Landon said. "If you read it with a conscience." By noon, the chapel walls were carefully dismantled and stacked, not torched. The garden tools were inventoried and tagged for county use. Even the kitchen stoves were loaded for delivery to the local orphanage. When the regional inspector arrived 2 days later expecting ashes, he found empty plots and neat paperwork. "Where's the camp?" he demanded. Landon handed him the forms. "Decommissioned per order. All materials destroyed, in the moral sense." The man blinked. "Are you joking?" Landon smiled. "Sir, I'm an engineer. We build, even when told to burn." Within a month, the former Camp Marlin Chapel had become Marlin County Elementary's assembly hall. Children sat on benches once occupied by prisoners. Above the door hung a small plaque in Landon's handwriting. "From walls that once divided, may voices now unite." Few ever knew how it happened. Landon never spoke of it publicly. He finished his service quietly and returned to architecture. But in 1947, when the new school opened, one of the German prisoners, now a free man living in Bremen, sent a letter addressed simply to Major Robert Landon, America. "You saved more than wood. You saved what we became inside those walls. The teleprinter chattered like a nervous typewriter. Captain Thorne sat in Major Landon's office, hat in hand, as a courier dropped a sealed envelope on the desk marked Confidential, Compliance Review. Landon read it quietly, his jaw working. Inspection team inbound, he said. 3 officers from Corps Command. They want to verify destruction per Directive 72C. Thorne swallowed. Sir, that means… Yes, Landon said. They expect ashes. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, Camp Marlin's flag fluttered above the gate one last time. Beyond it, where barracks once stood, the fields were already greening. Rows of newly planted saplings lined the perimeter, the work of the local school children. Thorne said softly, Sir, maybe we could still burn the empty lots. Say we followed the letter of the law. Landon turned. Captain, we followed the spirit. The letter can explain itself. They arrived 2 days later in a dusty jeep. 3 men in fresh khakis, faces tight from the road. The senior officer, Colonel Barrett, looked like someone carved from regulations. Angular, polished, unsmiling. Major Landon, he barked. Yes, sir. We're here to conduct post-decommission review of this facility. You'll find it ready for inspection, Landon said evenly. They toured the grounds. Barrett noted the absence of debris, the level grading, the lack of smoke stains. Your report says all structures removed and repurposed per authorized channels, he said. Define repurposed. Landon handed him the paperwork. Lumber allocated to Marlin County School District per civilian requisition. Kitchen equipment to local orphanage. Garden tools donated under Surplus Clause 18B. Barrett flipped pages, expression hardening. Major, Directive 72C specifies destruction. You redistributed property without command authorization. Correction, sir, Landon said. I preserved American resources. Everything logged and accounted for. Barrett stared. You realize this could be construed as insubordination? Landon met his eyes. If building instead of burning is insubordination, I'll take that charge. That evening, the inspectors set up temporary quarters in the old guardhouse. Thorne found Landon sitting alone by the empty flagpole. You should have burned something, Thorne muttered. A token pile of ashes. At least it would have kept them calm. Landon shook his head. A man can't half obey his conscience. It's either a flame or it isn't. Thorne sighed. Sir, if they court-martial you, they'll strip your record. Landon smiled faintly. Then they can have the paper. I'll keep the memory. The next morning, Colonel Barrett went to town for statements. He interviewed the mayor, the pastor, the county superintendent, expecting confirmation of misconduct. Instead, he found gratitude. At the elementary school, children were lining up under the former POW chapel's roof, now repainted white. A brass band practiced "You're a Grand Old Flag." The superintendent handed him a letter on district stationery. Major Landon's salvage work saved this community 6 months of construction and thousands of dollars in lumber costs. We recommend his commendation, not censure. At the orphanage, Barrett saw German-made stoves in the kitchen, their iron polished, flames steady. The matron said, They bake bread every morning on those now. The kids call it the peace oven. Something in Barrett's posture softened. You're telling me all this came from a POW camp? Yes, sir, she said, smiling. The major said those men didn't build walls, they built beginnings. Back at camp, Barrett found Landon repairing a fence post with his sleeves rolled up. You were ordered to destroy a symbol of captivity, Barrett said quietly. Instead, you turned it into a monument of decency. Landon looked up. Sir, history will decide what it was. I just didn't want our last act of the war to be fire. Barrett folded his hands behind his back. Officially, I'll have to report a deviation from directive. Unofficially, he paused. You did the right thing. Landon's relief was subtle, but real. Thank you, sir. Barrett nodded once. Don't thank me. Thank those kids singing under that roof. They made your argument louder than any report could. Weeks later, Landon received a personal letter from the Assistant Secretary of War. It began formally, as bureaucracy does, but ended differently. In a time when destruction was easier than compassion, you chose construction. The department recognizes that peace is not made by bonfires of wood, but by acts of conscience. Enclosed was a small commendation. Meritorious service for humanitarian conduct. Landon read it once, smiled, and tucked it into the same drawer as the telegram that had ordered him to burn. Across the ocean, in Bremen, a letter arrived for Friedrich Müller, the former POW who had built the chapel's cross. It bore an American stamp and a single sentence inside. The roof you built now shelters children. R.L. Müller read it aloud to his wife. Then he set his carpentry tools on the table and said, "We will build another." That year, he and a few former soldiers reconstructed a small chapel near the bombed docks, copying the Texas plans from memory. Above its entrance, they carved in English, "Peace once borrowed, now returned." In 1948, a photographer from Life magazine visited Texas to cover humanity stories of the home front. He stopped at Marlin Elementary, snapped a picture of children filing into the assembly hall. In the corner of the frame, the plaque was visible. "From walls that once divided, may voices now unite." The photograph ran nationwide with the caption, "A Texas school built from the ashes of a POW camp," except the commander refused to light the match. Overnight, Major Landon's quiet defiance became a lesson in military ethics classes. West Point cadets debated the Marlin decision as a case study in moral obedience versus blind compliance. In 1950, Landon was invited to Germany by a humanitarian group rebuilding war-damaged towns. He visited Bremen to inspect new housing designs, and was led unexpectedly to the small dockside chapel. He froze when he saw it. The same structure, same angles, same modest steeple. Friedrich Müller emerged from the doorway, older but unmistakable. They clasped hands in silence. Müller said softly, "You saved our chapel once. We rebuilt it for both sides." Landon nodded, eyes damp. "Looks like it traveled better than either of us." By the mid-1950s, the old campland was fully converted into farmland and school property. Only one post from the original fence remained. Landon had it mounted upright beside the school's flagpole, not as a barrier but as a reminder. When asked about it by a student reporter, he said, "That post once held wire. Now it holds memory. That's what peace is. Remembering what you refuse to destroy." Major Robert Landon retired in 1958. He never sought publicity. His file in the Army Archives lists him simply as Engineer, 4th Service Command, distinguished for resourceful leadership. But among veterans, he was known by a different title, the Commander Who Wouldn't Burn. Decades later, in 1995, during the 50th anniversary of the war's end, a delegation of German exchange students visited Marlin County Elementary. The principal showed them the original plaque, still mounted above the gym door. One student asked, "Who built this?" The teacher smiled, "German prisoners, and an American officer who thought peace was worth recycling." That afternoon, the children from Texas and Germany planted a pecan tree beside the fence post memorial. Its roots found the soil that once divided nations. The old campland had gone quiet again. Pecan trees now shaded the ground where barracks once stood, and the only sounds were the windmill and the shouts of children playing after school. Inside Marlin County Elementary, history teacher Ellen Ray graded essays on the same desks, built from the chapel's salvaged lumber. She'd grown up hearing the legend, the commander who refused to burn the camp, but she'd always wondered if it was true. One April morning, while sorting old documents in the school's basement, she opened a box marked "Property of U.S. Army Corps, do not discard." Inside were carbon-copied reports, ration stubs, and a thin manila envelope labeled Directive 72C, executed by Major R. Landon. She read the yellowed telegram, "Destroy all non-essential POW facilities," and beneath it, a handwritten note in blue ink. "Instead of ash, may we leave something that grows." Orel, Aug 12, 1945. Ellen set the papers down slowly. For 30 years, the proof had been waiting here. The order and the refusal side by side. That afternoon, she drove to the county library and pulled every archived issue of the Marlin Herald from 1945. There it was. A brief notice on page 6. POW Camp Marlin decommissioned. Major Landon commended for efficiency. Nothing about his defiance. Nothing about the children's hall. She photocopied everything, then called the number listed for Captain Thorne. "Now retired," a woman answered. "He's hard of hearing these days, but he'll want to talk if it's about the major." When Ellen reached him that evening, the old man's voice trembled but carried pride. "Robert Landon? Best man I ever served under. Washington told him to burn a school before it existed, and he refused. That's leadership." "Did he ever talk about it after the war?" she asked. "Never once. Said peace didn't need monuments, just maintenance." Ellen decided the story did need a monument, not of stone, but of memory. She presented her idea to the school board. A small exhibit in the main hall featuring the telegram, the commendation, and photographs of the original camp. At first, the board hesitated. Funding was tight. "People barely remember the war now," one member said. Ellen replied, "Then that's exactly why they need to." Within weeks, the local paper picked up the story. Teacher unearths telegram that changed Texas history. Letters poured in, from veterans, historians, and even a university in Germany offering assistance. Among them was an envelope postmarked Bremen. Inside was a photograph. A small chapel near the docks, its doorway engraved with words in both languages. Peace once borrowed, now returned. Attached was a note from Friedrich Müller Jr., son of the former POW. My father built this from memory. He said an American major refused fire and gave light instead. Ellen stared at the image for a long time, tears welling. The chapel still stood. Its twin, their gym, still echoed with children's voices. With help from the Bremen Cultural Office, Ellen arranged a student exchange. That fall, 10 Texas high schoolers traveled to Germany, carrying with them a copy of Landon's telegram and a small bronze plaque forged by local blacksmiths. Its inscription read, "From Texas, with thanks for the men who built peace instead of burning it." When they arrived, the German students greeted them outside the chapel, hands dusty from painting new benches. A breeze came off the river, smelling faintly of salt and pine, almost like Texas after rain. The ceremony was simple. The two groups took turns reading lines from the original directive and Landon's handwritten amendment. Then one of the German students, a tall boy named Matthias, said softly, "My grandfather was a prisoner at Camp Marlin. He told me the American commander treated them like men. He never forgot it." Ellen stepped forward. "Then we won't either." Months later, when the German students visited Marlin County, they stood beneath the pecan tree by the memorial fence post. Together they mounted a matching plaque below the original one. From Bremen, with peace to Major Robert Landon, who built instead of burned. For the dedication, the town invited every surviving veteran and their families. Among the crowd was a woman in her 70s with silver hair pinned neatly under a hat. She introduced herself to Ellen quietly. "I'm Mary Landon, Robert's daughter," she said. "He never told us the whole story, just that he hoped one day his silence would make a little noise." Ellen smiled. It finally did. Word spread fast. PBS sent a documentary team to cover the event. As cameras rolled, former guards, local teachers, and German guests shared their memories. One of the interviewers asked Mary, "What would your father think of all this attention?" She looked at the plaque shining in the sunlight. "He'd probably say, 'Good grief, it took you long enough?' Then he'd ask if the roof still leaks." Laughter rippled through the crowd. That night, the special aired nationally under the title, "The Commander Who Wouldn't Burn." Viewers flooded the station with letters. Veterans called it healing. Teachers requested copies for civics classes. The U.S. Army's Historical Office formally reclassified Camp Marlin as Preserved Site of Ethical Significance. The phrase sounded bureaucratic, but it meant one thing. The Army had officially recognized a soldier's conscience as part of its heritage. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, the school buried a time capsule beside the pecan tree. Inside they placed a copy of the telegram and Landon's handwritten amendment, a piece of wood from the original chapel, soil from the Bremen site, a note written by one of Ellen's students. "When they ordered him to burn, he chose to build. That's what we want to remember about grown-ups." They sealed it beneath the roots, with instructions to open it in 50 years. Half a world away, in Bremen, the dockside chapel hosted a joint service commemorating 50 years of peace. The Texas and German flags hung side by side inside the wooden doorway. An elderly man rose from the front pew, Friedrich Müller, Jr., holding a small cedar box. Inside was a brass fragment, the corner of a plaque melted in the bombing of 1944. He placed it at the altar and said, "This piece came from destruction. It belongs beside the wood that refused to burn." A choir sang a simple hymn, the same one prisoners had sung under Texas stars half a century earlier. Outside, rain tapped on the roof like quiet applause. The Commander Who Wouldn't Burn exhibit had grown into a full museum wing. Visitors walked through reconstructed barracks, displays of children's drawings, and a glowing replica of the chapel cross built from the last surviving beam. A sign above the exit read, "Peace doesn't start with surrender. It starts when someone says no to destruction." School groups from across the country visited. Veterans left medals at the plaque. A few even whispered, "We needed more Majors Landon." In 2015, a curator sorting through declassified military archives in Washington found a sealed envelope. Inside, the original commendation letter and a personal note never delivered. "Major Landon, history will record victories in battles and in buildings. You gave us one of the latter. The department regrets that official protocol cannot award a medal for mercy. But please know, mercy remembers itself. Assistant Secretary of War, 1946, the curator sent a scanned copy to the Marlin Museum. It hangs there now beside the telegram. 2 orders, one to destroy, one to remember. 80 years after the camp's dismantling, the pecan tree towers above the field. Its roots have cracked the old concrete posts. Wildflowers cover what was once a perimeter line. On the anniversary of the end of the war, local students gather beneath its shade. They read aloud from the time capsule letter that was unearthed that morning. When they ordered him to burn, he chose to build. A soft wind moves through the branches, carrying the faint creak of the school flagpole and the sound of distant laughter from the playground. Ellen Ray, now elderly, leaning on a cane, smiles. "You hear that?" she tells the students. "That's what peace sounds like when it keeps working." They nod, listening. And above them, sunlight flashes on the bronze plaques, bright as new flame. The kind that warms instead of destroys.